Everyone expected the millionaire to impress his powerful foreign guests. But when he opened his mouth, no one understood a word he said. Panic filled the room, until the most unexpected person, a black janitor in dusty overalls, stepped forward. In just 1 minute, he solved what no one else could. The sun was barely up when the grand doors of the luxury conference hall swung open, revealing chandeliers sparkling like diamonds and long polished tables set with crystal glasses and golden pens. Every corner of the room spoke of wealth, power, and preparation. The millionaire, dressed in his finest tailored navy blue suit, adjusted his cufflinks and glanced at his reflection in the glossy windows. Today was supposed to be the greatest day of his career, the day he would finally secure the partnership that would make his company global. Foreign investors from across the ocean were flying in, men and women with reputations so strong that newspapers called them kingmakers. As he waited, cameras flashed from reporters outside, staff rushed nervously with documents, and waiters served trays of coffee and water. The millionaire's chest swelled with pride as he rehearsed his speech in his head, every word sharp and convincing. But the moment the tall, confident investors entered the room, speaking in their native language, a strange silence fell over him. Their words flowed like a river, filled with gestures and numbers, but not a single one made sense to his ears. He blinked, smiled stiffly, and pretended to follow, but beads of sweat began to form on his forehead. His assistants looked at one another in panic. Where was the translator? The millionaire's throat tightened, his palms grew damp, and for the first time that morning, he realized something he had overlooked. The language barrier wasn't a small problem. It was a mountain blocking his path. All the money, the expensive suit, and the glittering room meant nothing if he couldn't even speak to the people who held his future in their hands. The moment the investors began to speak, the millionaire's world started crumbling. Their voices carried confidence and authority, words rolling smoothly in a language he couldn't understand. He forced a polite smile, nodding at the right moments, but inside his chest his heart pounded like a drum. Sweat trickled down his back beneath his expensive suit, and his throat felt dry as dust. The investors exchanged puzzled looks, their tones sharpening as they asked questions he couldn't answer. He tried to laugh it off, mumbling phrases in broken English, but the gap between them only grew wider. His assistants, standing by the wall, whispered frantically, "Should we call someone? Do you need a translator?" Their eyes showed fear because they too understood what was at stake. This wasn't just a casual meeting. It was a multi-million-dollar deal, the type of opportunity that came once in a lifetime. If he failed to impress these investors, the news would spread like wildfire through the business world, and his empire would lose its shine overnight. His legs trembled slightly as he shifted his weight, gripping the edge of the table for balance. The investors leaned closer, their voices rising in impatience, and the millionaire's mind screamed for a solution that wasn't there. The silence between each failed attempt grew heavier, pressing down on everyone in the room. Outside the glass walls, cameras continued to flash as journalists prepared their headlines, completely unaware of the disaster unfolding inside. Just when the tension reached its peak, a sudden clatter broke through the air, the sound of a mop bucket tipping over in the corner. Heads turned, eyes narrowing at the janitor who stood frozen, clutching his mop handle. For the millionaire, it was just a distraction. But in that quiet man's calm eyes, the real solution was waiting to be revealed. The room held its breath after the mop bucket clattered, every eye landing on the janitor in the corner. He was a tall black man in faded overalls, his hands rough from years of labor, his shoulders stooped from endless hours of cleaning. Yet his presence was calm, almost unshaken by the tension suffocating the hall. Slowly, he set his mop aside, straightened his back, and cleared his throat. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice steady but respectful, addressing the millionaire. The millionaire frowned, his pride already bruised, his nerves stretched thin. What could a janitor possibly offer at a moment when millions of dollars and his reputation were at risk? But before he could dismiss him, the janitor turned toward the investors and began to speak fluently in their native tongue. The foreign guests blinked in surprise, their stern expressions melting into wide smiles. One of them laughed with relief. Another leaned forward eagerly as the janitor translated their words with ease, not missing a single detail. The tension that had strangled the room only moments before dissolved like smoke in the wind. The millionaire stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as the janitor moved effortlessly between languages, bridging the gap that had seemed impossible to cross. Staff members exchanged astonished glances, whispering among themselves, while the investors nodded in approval, their respect for the janitor growing with every passing second. What had been a looming disaster turned into a smooth conversation, filled with laughter, handshakes, and understanding. In less than a minute, the janitor had solved what the millionaire, with all his wealth and influence, could not. And for the first time, the room looked not at the man in the suit, but at the worker in worn clothes who had become the most important person in the building. As the janitor continued to translate, the atmosphere of the meeting shifted completely. The investors, once tense and doubtful, now leaned forward with genuine interest, gesturing enthusiastically as their ideas poured out. Every phrase, every figure, every subtle tone was carried perfectly by the janitor's steady voice. His words were smooth and confident, showing not just knowledge of the language, but also a deep understanding of culture and respect. The millionaire, still seated at the head of the table, could barely comprehend what was happening. Just moments ago, he had been drowning in panic, his empire seconds away from public humiliation, but now the very man he had overlooked countless times was saving him. Assistants stood quietly in the background, their eyes wide, watching the janitor command the room with nothing more than his voice and calm presence. The investors nodded in approval, even laughing at the janitor's well-timed explanations, their earlier impatience replaced by warmth and trust. Papers were signed, agreements were clarified, and the looming disaster transformed into a promising partnership. The millionaire forced a smile, clapping along when the deal was sealed, but inside he felt something new, a sting of humility. He realized that power was not always in money or position, but in knowledge, humility, and the ability to connect with people. The janitor had shown in minutes what no amount of wealth could buy: respect earned by skill and character. For the first time, the millionaire looked at him not as a worker in worn clothes, but as the man who had held the weight of his empire in his hands and carried it with ease. Around the table, the investors shook the janitor's hand firmly, treating him as an equal, while the millionaire sat silently, humbled by the truth he could no longer ignore. When the meeting finally ended, the investors walked out with broad smiles, promising a future partnership that would change everything. Reporters snapped photos as they departed, unaware that the real story had unfolded inside those walls. The millionaire remained seated for a long moment, his pride bruised, yet his heart strangely lighter. Slowly, he turned toward the janitor, who was quietly picking up his mop again, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. "Why didn't you ever tell me you spoke their language?" the millionaire asked, his voice low but sincere. The janitor paused, looked him in the eye, and replied with a small smile, "Because no one ever asked." Those simple words pierced deeper than any criticism. The room fell quiet, as even the assistants lowered their heads, realizing how often they had ignored the man who now stood taller than all of them. The millionaire felt something shift inside him, an understanding that respect is not measured by titles, clothes, or bank accounts, but by the value a person carries within. For years, he had overlooked the janitor as just another worker blending into the background, never considering the depth of his abilities or the richness of his mind. Now he knew better. With genuine humility, the millionaire extended his hand, not as a gesture of superiority, but as one of gratitude. The janitor accepted it without hesitation, his calm eyes reflecting quiet dignity. From that day forward, the millionaire carried a new lesson carved deep into his soul. Greatness does not always wear silk ties or shine in chandeliers. Sometimes it holds a mop and walks silently in the shadows. And in moments of crisis, it is often the most overlooked person who holds the power to change everything.